Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video I would like to talk about this camera right here. It's the Canon EOS 400d. Now this camera has been out for a little while now. I know, actually way back in around 2006 I believe, and it has been a really fun DSLR to use. I got it last year and it was actually quite affordable, around 50 euros with a kit lens. Now it's not like a special promotion price or anything. You can really find this camera for around 50 euros with another lens usually. I missed the one before this, though it came with the 51.8. I regret it so bad because I had something to do and I couldn't really bid on eBay. And then later I found out that there was actually a sniping tool. Anyway, back into the video. So in this video, I would like to talk about the ergonomics, the image quality, and what I think about it, and why I actually recommend getting this camera. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon EOS 400d, now this camera is a really special camera in my heart because it was one of the cameras that I actually trained photography in, and using it actually brought back a lot of nostalgic feelings. And to be honest, this camera is still really capable in my opinion if you're actually only doing like general photography use. So for this video, I would like to actually categorize it into three different sections, which is the operational side, usability, ergonomics, things like that, and then I'll move into the image quality part, and then I'll go into my conclusion. So first, let's start with the usability, the ergonomics, the operational side of things. This camera is a really small and light camera to use. The grip feels nice if you have smaller hands, but if you have bigger hands, you can also like spend 20 or 30 euros extra and get like an additional battery grip, and you'll have a fuller grip on here. But otherwise, this is a really nice and fun camera to use. The size is the size is small and the weight is light, and this camera is still able to accept a lot of the more modern Canon accessories as well. So even if you have like the newer flashes from Canon, you still can mount it on here. If you have the newer lenses, EF or EFS lenses from Canon, or other brands that produce EF and EFS lenses, then it will also go on here. So it's a really nice camera that, you know, to get your foot into photography and learn about photography, yet giving you like a lot of the effects and different perspective as how other cameras would also give you. Now this camera isn't really a camera that you would really take it to a lot of downpour, heavy rain, dust storm, snowstorm. It is not weather sealed, so don't try doing that, but it is built quite decently. So if you are like based in Northern Europe and you're taking through Northern European winter, then it will definitely survive. Being a camera that is this size and doesn't consume a lot of power, it also means that the battery will also last for quite a few shots. Now I haven't really recharged this battery for the past 2 weeks, and I've been taking it out here in Amsterdam pretty much. You know, it's still at, let me check, 3 bars. Look at that. Now the battery life will vary because, you know, this is a really old camera, but you can get a lot of really good third-party brand batteries for this camera for really low price, simply because it has been out for a little while now, and yeah, a lot of accessories for it. For the 400d in particular, the price definitely have decreased over time. Now this camera being an old photocentric camera, it also means that the features on here are very limited. That's actually a good thing, simply because all the buttons at the back here are dedicated to the main functions, main settings of the camera. So let's say if you want to change your ISO, it's just right here. If you want to change your AF points, it's just here, or AF system, it's just right here. And if you just want to change your white balance, it's also over here. You get the idea. All the main functions that you need to actually program are actually on all of these buttons right here at the back of the camera. And that's actually a really nice thing, because this camera is a compact camera and you can actually just focus on your moments, on your stories, on what you're actually capturing, versus to actually go into the menu settings and, you know, going through like, okay, where is the ISO or where is the AF? It's actually right, you know, on all of these buttons right here, which is actually pretty nice. So while I touch upon the autofocusing points, let's talk about the autofocusing system. So on this camera, it's not like the state-of-the-art autofocusing system, don't get me wrong, but it is still gonna get the job done. If you have like a perfect lighting, or if you're outdoors or if you're indoors but not too dark, it will get the job done. It's not the most lightning quick autofocusing system in the world, but it is still fast. And if you're outside doing street photography, like general purpose street photography, for example, it will get the job done as well. If you're indoors, like doing some product photography or photographing food, things like that, it will also get the job done. It's just a really general autofocusing points or autofocusing system that you can rely on general photography. But just keep in mind that you won't really be able to, you know, track a moving object that's running towards you, or a really fast moving object that's running left and right. It's not going to be really accurate for that. And in low light, don't move your camera around when you're actually trying to focus, otherwise it actually will confuse the camera a little bit. So just be as steady as possible and it will actually get in focus. And once it's confirmed it's in focus, it is actually going to be really in focus. So that's a nice thing about this camera. Now this camera, the one benefit that it has over the 350D is the 9 autofocusing points. The 1000D went back to the 7, just like the 350D, but this maintains the 9 autofocusing points, which is actually quite nice in my opinion. Now I know that the more modern mirrorless cameras will have like over hundreds of autofocusing points, but to be honest, 9 autofocusing points is just enough. I really love my 5D Mark II's 9 autofocusing system, simply because, you know, it's just the bare essentials. Like, all the points are just pretty much in the rule of third, and you don't really need more of that apart from when you're actually photographing sports, or when you're actually photographing something that's moving, like a moving portrait, where, you know, the face could be all over the place if they're dancing, if they're moving slightly, things like that. But other than that, I think for general focusing purposes, for general photography, I think that the 9-point AF is actually really nice to use. Another point that I really like about this camera is the fact that this camera actually starts up really quickly, and once it starts up, you can actually take photo right away, which is really nice. And when you start the camera, it will actually do the sensor cleaning part, which is nice, but if you want to take a picture right away, it will just cancel it out completely, so it's not like gonna give you an error or anything. And then when you switch it off, it will also do the sensor cleaning, which is also nice. So yeah, there is that. And another point I would like to make is, just like the other Canon cameras with flashes, most of them have really tall flashes, which is nice, and I always mention it because some people like to take portraits at night with flashes, like especially the built-in flashes. And with the built-in flashes, because it's so far away from the lens, well, not that far, but kind of tall and further away from the lens, that means that there's actually a lesser chance for you to actually get that red eye effect. You remember those days when people like to take flash photography, flash portraits at night, especially at discos or something, with their phone or compact camera, and a lot of people have red eyes simply because the flash was just too close to the lens? Well, this one is actually, yeah, it's a little bit further away from the lens, so it gives you like a little bit less chance of getting that red eye effect. That being said, this camera also have the red eye correction in camera, so yeah, you can actually adjust it there, but it will not get rid of it completely, especially if you're taking photo at like disco places at night. So just keep that in mind. One last point that I would like to actually make is the media storage. This one takes CF cards. I know that a lot of people really don't like CF cards, but I personally prefer CF cards over SD cards, simply because they prove to be much more durable as well as more reliable than SD cards. But that's just me. But otherwise, if you're using SD cards, you can always get one of those compact flash dummy cards that reads SD cards that you can actually put into this camera. So yeah, and one last point before I talk about the image quality is the burst rate. Now, a lot of people like to make a big deal about burst rate. Well, this has really not that much to burst about. It takes 3 frames per second. I believe it goes up to around 10 frames per second, like for buffer if you're shooting RAW. Don't quote me on that. And I believe it's around 25 or 27 JPEGs if you're shooting JPEGs before the buffer fills up, which is really a huge upgrade compared to like a 4 RAW image per buffer on the 350D or 14 JPEGs on the 350D, especially when it's, you know, delivering 10 megapixels versus the 8 megapixels on the 350D. Now, I think for general purpose photography, I think it's quite okay. I mean, you're not going to be putting this camera on like the burst mode all the time. So around 10 RAW would definitely be good, or 27 JPEGs, that's actually quite good. You're not shooting a baseball game with this camera, so yeah. Anyway, let's go into the image quality. The image quality on this camera is quite nice. It's a little bit warmer than some other entry-level cameras. In my opinion, it's warmer than the older 350D, but it's also warmer than something like a 500D, the 1000D. So yeah, just keep that in mind, but it's not too warm, don't worry. It has a really unique character to it. It still has that Canon color signs and Canon color skin tone, things like that, but from, you know, that era, because, you know, Canon also made tweaks to their color signs from year to year and to different releases. And I still find that the Canon color signs on this camera is still quite nice. The rendering into the highlights and the shadows is also quite natural. The skin tone is quite nice and natural as well. When you're editing it, it's actually quite nice looking, that you're not really seeing some weird colors creeping in. So if you're using something like the Panasonic system, for example, when you're trying to edit skin tone, sometimes even more weird magenta or yellow creeps into the skin tone, which doesn't really happen with this camera, which is actually quite nice. Now this camera, the files are actually really cute in my opinion, because you know, it's only 10 megapixels, and the camera from back then, the raw files aren't really large at all. It's kind of like the more modern day standards of JPEGs. So it was really light to edit on computer and everything. A lot of more modern cameras, or sorry, a lot of more modern computers will definitely read it like butter. So it's quite nice. The low light performance is okay, I would say, for such a camera if you don't use higher ISO than 800. If you're using like 1600, that's where it gets really noisy and pixelated, and you might have to clean it up in post. Now, if you're just posting your images into social media, then I would say 1600 is kind of okay. You may be able to, you know, trade a little bit of the resolution in Lightroom or in your editing software just to clean up the noise and the pixelation. But you know, it's 10 megapixels. You have enough room for cleaning up the noise reduction, things like that. But it's best to keep the camera under 800 ISO if possible. So usually with this camera, I try to shoot under, well, between 800 and 200. 100 is okay, but it's not as good as 200. If you really want to go to like a sweet spot on this camera, it's between 200 and 400, I would say. So yeah, that's it about the image quality. It's not really a lot to talk about, simply because, well, it's 10 megapixel and it's still really clean to a certain extent. You still can actually print really nicely at A2 or A3 level. You just have to make sure that, you know, when you're doing such a really fine print, make sure that your ISO is really clean up, because even at ISO 800, you might start to see some noise creeping in at, you know, A2 precise print. But if you're not planning to print really finely, then, you know, this camera is perfect. This camera will definitely deliver you really good enough quality results for a lot of general purpose photography, especially for its price points, 50 euros with a kit lens or with another additional lens and accessories. So yeah, it's quite a bargain. And now let's actually talk about my conclusion before this video gets too long. So this camera, in my opinion, it is a really fun and joyful camera to really use. It's actually a camera that kind of like brings me back to, you know, back in the day. It gives you this nostalgic digital look that you don't really get anymore with the more modern digital cameras. And it's really fun to really use this camera and see how the results will go, and to see how different colors react in certain lighting and condition. Simply because modern cameras, it gives a really nice and realistic look, don't get me wrong, with the more modern cameras. But with the cameras back in the day, there is some sort of character to the image, and there is some sort of, you know, feel to it. I'm not only talking about like that nostalgic feeling, but it's also that vintage digital feeling that you get from cameras back in like 2006, 2007. That you don't really get anymore nowadays, because you have to remember that back then they tried to, like, well, all the camera manufacturers just try to make digital camera, you know, as good as film pretty much, because a lot of photographers were still coming back from film. And seeing the different kind of characteristics that these older DSLRs can actually produce, it's actually quite nice to take it out and take pictures with it. And knowing that this camera is photography centric, meaning that there's no other distractions to distract you away from capturing that moment, it's just a really pleasant camera to use. You know, like being a camera that is really limited in features means that you can really approach your images through, you know, your conceptualization part, your storytelling part, your framing, things like that, versus from the technical side of things. So what I find myself doing with, you know, the more modern cameras, or even like not so modern cameras, but like let's say the 1DX that I have back there, is like I tend to think about, okay, this camera has this feature, so I can actually access or create that kind of image with this feature, things like that. And I tend to think more on the technical side rather than on the framing or on the conceptualization part or on the storytelling part. And whereas with this camera, it's really just fun to use and really relaxing, especially for the form factor, the size of it, it's just perfect. And for the reason that it is able to really accept a lot of the more modern accessories with it as well, it just makes it even a better camera to use it nowadays. So yeah, that's just pretty much my conclusion. I still recommend you really experimenting with it. If you want to get into photography and if you only have like really limited amount of budget, let's say 50 euros to spend, you know, like you don't care if you just end up throwing the camera away or reselling it, then this camera is something I would also recommend. It has sensor cleaning, it has 10 megapixels, it has pretty much all the core functions that you will need apart from video. That being said, if you need something like the live view feature where you can actually see your composition live on the LCD, then maybe something like the 1000D here will be a much better camera. It has a newer 10 megapixel sensor compared to this. The color science is really different, images are cleaner, but it is still around 60 or 50 euros price point. So it can be like 5 or 10 euros more expensive, which is not really that much of a big deal. But if you really want to experiment with the older digital look, then I would highly recommend this camera. But if you're just starting out, then, you know, something like the 1000D, the 450D, the 500D, roughly in the same price bracket will definitely be your cameras to consider more than the 400D. Anyway, I hope you can actually take something away from this video, if not a lot, then a little. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's linked down in the description below. It's absolutely for free, just click and download. No need to submit your email address, and I will not bombard you with newsletters nonsense. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Bye for now.